Keep hearing, Steve, that there are real fears in the region that this may spread beyond Syria.
Sure, it's already spread beyond Syria into Lebanon. There's been a series of kidnappings of Syrians inside Lebanon. These are revenge kidnappings for kidnappings of Lebanese inside Syria. The effect of this is that the violence is basically spreading from Syria into Lebanon, and now you have 5 countries, including Saudi Arabia. They are pulling out all their citizens from Lebanon. So the chaos that we're seeing inside Syria beginning to cross the border, Shepard.
Steve, stay with us, if you will, while we bring in Mike Barrett. He's a former intelligence officer for the Office of the Secretary of Defense, and right now the CEO of Diligent Innovations. That's a D.C. consulting firm. You know, Mike, last night on Fox Report, Steve Harrigan recalled what he witnessed, the bombs dropping on 40 innocents from which there was no fighting, a one-way fight, and described it in his mind as genocide. You say what you're seeing is not so unexpected.
Well, I mean, it's clearly horrible, and don't get me wrong, it's not that I'm trying to justify it, but, you know, when you look at it from the regime's point of view, this is all out war, right? This is all about survival, and they're going to use every tactic they've got, every trick that they have, and every tool that they have, and those tools include tanks, and it includes going after the civilians. I think it was interesting just a second ago when you were talking about this spilling over outside of Syria. I think I would argue it the other way, that this is really a regional conflict that is just emerging within Syria. This is really about Sunni versus Shia. And we've seen that, the so-called Arab Spring, what we've really seen is the replacement of any number of Shia leaders and dictators with Sunni leaders. And it sort of looks like Sunni Islam is on the rise here. That's why Iran is so concerned, and that's why, of course, on the other side, that Saudi Arabia is so engaged.
Steve, it may have started, as Mike observes, as an uprising of the people, but there's widespread evidence that he's right on that point, isn't there?
Yes, Shepard, and I'd like to ask Mike, while we have him there, what he thinks of this as a basic military strategy. Is dropping 2 missiles on civilians, killing 40 of them, a good military strategy in some way? Can Assad continue to get away with this? Is there a certain level, a certain number of civilians you can kill to induce panic in the enemy and still survive in power?
Sadly, there absolutely is. I mean, Assad's father himself killed tens of thousands of people in a similar uprising 2 decades ago. So what you see here is it's really almost in a sense, if you think about how we use economic sanctions, and the idea is to break the will of the people so that the leadership will change. It's the same thing that Assad's doing here. He has to break the will of the people who are allowing the rebels to operate within the various cities, because if the rebels all had to go out into the fields, they're not in the cities, then they could target the rebels. You know, again, I don't justify it, but from an all-out war perspective, it's a war about survival for the Assad regime, and they're going to use everything that they can. So this is just going to keep getting bloodier and bloodier, unfortunately.
Is it your observation and that of other journalists, Steve, that's happening, that the will is being broken, or not?
I would say not. I would say it's the reverse effect. It's interesting to try and compare these rebel fighters, the little we've seen of them so far, with what we saw in Libya a year ago. Those rebels were, for a while, the gang who couldn't shoot straight. They'd run forward for a few days, then run backwards for a few days. And yet these rebels here in Libya seem to be holding firm, at least in Aleppo, Shepard.
Steve Harrigan on the border, Mike Barrett from Washington. Thank you both, and greatly appreciated. Well,
Thank you.